So what's the real answer to how much protein do you actually need? I'm going to answer that based on the answers that came from several of our speakers for the what, why, and when to exercise for women over 40. If you missed it, I'm going to place a link. You can go back and look at the recordings. If we're still in it, you can jump in now, and it's free. So you're not out anything, and you potentially get the opportunity to jump into the rest. But here's the confusion, right? So 40 years I've been in fitness, and this is still a point of confusion, and it's emotional. What we eat, when we eat it, how we eat it, it's emotional. So that's why protein is such a big factor. But if you're a female and you're in midlife or menopause, the risk of insulin resistant is really great. So as your hormones change and estrogen declines, you don't have stimulus for muscle. You're going to struggle a little bit with building muscle because you also have less testosterone and you have less DHEA. We don't hear as much about that one, but it's like a precursor to testosterone and estrogen. And here's how that works. It's like if you don't take algebra, you should not go on to trigonometry because you're going to be lost, right? Same thing. If you don't have DHEA, you can't actually make the testosterone and estrogen. And testosterone you can make from the right habits, like HIIT, not endurance. Endurance kills testosterone. From doing strength training, from getting good sleep, from you're going to increase your chances or your odds of creating it if you leave the sugar, including alcohol or foods that turn to sugar, out of your diet. Let's come back to how much protein you need and why we need it. So if you're putting on fat around the midsection, even if you didn't gain weight, but you're just like, this is not the belly that you used to have, you've got an issue potentially with a little bit more insulin resistance, meaning for everything that you eat, even if it's the same as you used to eat, it takes a little bit more insulin going into your system to get that blood sugar back down after a meal. Well, when insulin is present, you're in fat storage mode. So that's not going to work very well if each meal you have more and more insulin. It takes hours for it to come back down, and it's actually, unfortunately, even worse than that. So once you raise your insulin level for the day, that day is kind of a wash. So don't start your morning with high carbohydrates because that increases your blood sugar levels. It increases the amount of insulin you have to have. And for the rest of the day, you're more easily in fat storage and you're just trying to play catch up. So start with a high protein diet. But how much? So here's the key things I want you to remember. Number one, the biggest and most important 2 times of day for you to get a high protein meal, we'll talk about what's high in a moment, are breakfast when you're breaking your overnight fast. Breakfast, so you get a big hit of, here you go, muscle, let's come back to life, and the end of the day right before you go into your fast. So those are key. Those are your anchors for anytime you're not eating and anytime you're not exercising, your muscle protein synthesis falls down. Muscle protein synthesis, what does that mean? It means the ability to use protein from food we eat for the benefit and the building block of our lean muscle. Because if we're not getting enough protein, we're going to struggle to gain lean muscle or to even maintain it. So there's lots of levels we could be looking at. You're at a point of muscle loss, so you could stop that, and then all we're doing is preserving it. We're going to keep what you've got. But more of us are going to want to gain lean muscle because by the time we're 60, and some of you watching, you're 60, but don't think it's too late. Don't hang it up. You will have a harder time gaining lean muscle. We lose it even more at a faster rate after the age of 60. Between 30 and 60, we lose 3 to 8% every decade of our lives. Now, the 3% is probably those people who are actively strength training and actively eating a high amount of protein and getting good sleep and rest and not too stressed, because stress or the cortisol hormone tears down your muscle. So 8% probably is those of us who weren't strength training as regularly as maybe we were doing other things. You could have been active, but you weren't doing as much good for holding on to or gaining lean muscle. And if you had X amount of money in the bank and you start to withdraw, you're either withdrawing really quickly or on a slower pace. Same thing is true for your muscle. True for bone too, but we won't go there. So beginning of the day, really key that you get a high protein breakfast. Late in the day, your last meal, don't just decide, well, I'm not very hungry for dinner, unless you can think back and say, my last meal was at what time and how high was my protein content? That last meal of the day, really, you want to be planned and on purpose, okay? So let's talk about how much protein. So in the course of a day, this came from Dr. Gabrielle Lyons. This is also something that Dr. Stuart Phillips talked about, and they gave it and expressed two different ways. So Dr. Phillips is a researcher in a clinical setting at a university working with grad students, coming up with research on a regular basis, semester after semester, and what typically is used in that more clinical, administrative, kind of academic setting is a certain grams of protein per kilograms of body weight. And that's what he used and how he expressed it. So the difference is that when you do the math, it may be slightly different than the way Dr. Gabrielle Lyons and many of us are adapting to since about 2008, 2010, 2013, more and more fitness pros and dietitians will recommend it this way because it makes sense. It's user friendly. You're not going to get out a calculator at lunch and say, what's the percentage of protein I'm having? You're not going to get one out and say, okay, per kilogram of body weight, well, first I have to figure out what my pound is in kilograms, right? Okay, you can get there. And then I need a gram of protein or some ratio. Do you see how complicated it gets? It's not user friendly. But when we express it like this, your lean or your ideal body weight in pounds, and a lot of people are saying, how do I know what that is? Well, at one point in your life, probably you felt good. You were at your more ideal body weight. Now you can use as kind of a subjective guess, based on height and weight scales. This is not totally comprehensive. It's not conclusive, but it will give you a good idea of here's a range that is healthy. What we need to know is more of that is muscle and not fat. But if I, for instance, weigh, and I'm just going to throw this out because it's easy for me to talk about myself. I know my weight, right? So if I weigh 130, 134 right now, but I feel most healthy now that doesn't mean no struggle, no deprivation, no overexercise, nothing is going on that makes me I can't do that realistically. I'm at my ideal at about 126 to 128. So I could probably stand to lose about 6 pounds and feel better. That would be my ideal body weight. Now, I don't want to be 126 and 35% body fat, because that's still classified as obese. I want to be somewhere between 18 and 28% body fat. It's kind of a healthy range, and each of us has a place along that mark where we thrive, and there's a place then where if we're trying to do this is almost, I can't keep this up. Or if you're a woman who has a regular cycle, if you go too low, you may stop cycling. It won't work, and it's very unique to individuals. I have worked with many students, like 200 students every semester for 15 years, tested them all with body composition pre and post, and there's all different kinds of healthy, and worked with hundreds and thousands of women otherwise since, looking at their own levels in SMART scales and reporting them. And what we find is some women thrive, and they look and are behaving as healthy at a percent body fat of 27 or 28%. Others do really well at, say, 20%. But it is, if you're striving for a number and that is just a goal, but it's actually not where you feel the most healthy, that's where you get into trouble. So you want to be thinking, what if I'm eating healthy, sleeping healthy, dealing with stress really well, I'm exercising in a safe, sane way, and I can do that for the rest of my life. Where's my percent body fat then when I feel good around the clock? that is most related to your percent body fat. But let's come back to just weight. So it doesn't matter what the composition of that weight is, but that's how you would determine when was it I felt my best. And if you've never been there, using a chart, and you can find that and just Google it and say, okay, what's a height, weight, what's an appropriate weight for someone who's 5'4" or 5'8", and get a good idea. And there will be some, with a frame, if you can take your fingers around your longest finger and your thumb around your wrist, and you can touch, you are an average frame. So your bony structure is average. If they overlap, you're a smaller frame. And if they don't touch, there's a gap between them, you're a larger frame person. That's going to affect where your weight would be as well. Okay. So, but I don't think you need to make this really complicated. And from that, so if I want to and feel best at 128, let's say, I need and want 128 grams of protein per day. But here's how we take it. We just say, here you go. Just add it up. And at the end of the day, if you've got that, you're good to go. No, we need to take it more like it's a prescription drug. So somebody gives you a prescription for, say, penicillin because you've got something that we need a kick out of you. It's given in doses generally of 3 times a day. I want you to take this, kind of a breakfast, lunch, and a dinner, evenly distributed so it stays in your bloodstream, right? And similarly with protein, we want to take it so it's evenly distributed. But what we also know is if you start with a higher protein breakfast, muscle protein synthesis gets a bump. That means your muscles are like getting fed, okay? And that starts to come down after an hour, and then 2 hours, and 3 and 4 hours, and you need another bump. But breakfast is potentially, for most of us, a little closer to lunch than lunch to dinner, right? So if you already had a really big breakfast, it's coming down, but you may not need such a huge bump again. You just need a little bump. Let's bring it back up, and then it will start coming back down. And that last meal of the day, you want a big bump because you're about to go into an overnight fast. So if you think about distributing, if it feels hard to get another high protein lunch in that middle meal of the day, don't worry about it quite as much if it's not as high. Here's the number though, that is your threshold. So let's say you're pedaling a bicycle uphill and you can't quite get uphill, you got to turn around and go back home, right? And similarly, if you don't get over the threshold for muscle protein synthesis, we haven't really done your muscles any good. Like we didn't get delivery to them. So it's like it went to the wrong address. So you've got to get 30 grams of protein at a meal. Now you might say 25 to 30 is kind of the range given, but I would say shoot higher because most women are struggling to eat as much as they need. So about 30 grams of protein, what does that look like? If you go here, your palm to your first knuckle, just fold that down, and then about 3/4 of an inch thick. If you can just eyeball shrimp, salmon, a bison burger, you can have turkey, you can have halibut and cod, you can have elk, venison. I like wild meats because it's raised better, and we are what our protein sources ate. And I know some of you may be plant-based, and I won't go into why there's a higher quality of protein that comes from animal protein sources in terms of the essential amino acids that you take in. But it is true that you'll eat fewer calories, much of them, or much less carbohydrate intake when you're taking in your animal protein. So the key things are your body weight in pounds, or your ideal body weight in pounds, in grams of protein, the distribution of that evenly or really high, and just get another little bump in there. And that actually is much better for you than just saying, okay, randomly, I'm going to have a snack and count that protein, because if it was below 30, and most snacks are, it's not actually helping the muscle protein synthesis. It will help potentially you not get hungry, stay full. It'll help your satiety, but it won't necessarily help anything as far as giving your muscles the bump. So have a good high quality meal, and it will, high protein, keep you full longer, especially if you add fiber to that. Protein and fiber kill cravings. Golden. So they're also lend themselves to a better body composition, which is what we all want. So things to consider. And last but not least, the question that we often get is, okay, what about days when I exercise or strength train versus days that I don't? Do I still need the protein? And the answer is yes. So in your recovery from strength training, your use and repair that's going on in the recovery still uses up extra protein and extra energy for 24, or if it was a challenging workout, it can be up to 48 or 72 hours. So that's why we want to spread those workouts out so the repair definitely happens and you're boosting your metabolism. Because your body, your circulatory system is actually doing much more repair, and the protein will keep your energy up. Generally, people who are eating poorly between workouts, or those who are more sore, more achy, and those who begin to eat more protein, number one, right away have more energy. So the workout is better and higher quality, but so too is the recovery. You feel good, you feel energetic, and you're expending more calories than on your rest days because you want to be more active. You've got the energy to spend. So I hope that was helpful. No matter what you're doing for strength training, if you're not eating in a way that supports your growing that lean muscle mass with definitely high protein, we're not going to ignore carbohydrates. You need some high quality carbs with that as well. But there's your tips on just how much protein do I really need. I'd love to hear your questions. Subscribe not to miss any part. And if you haven't gotten into the what, when, and why to exercise for women 40 and over, I'm going to put the link up and down. See you there.